Previously on Ninja News Japan, it was mentioned multiple times that Suga is not going to be the prime minister for very much longer. He's actually going to step down. I don't think he wanted to. And I think he's getting sort of a bum deal. I think people are being harsher on him than he deserves. I don't think any prime minister who had just come in could really, blossom, I don't think is the right word, but that's what I'm going to say because I already said it. Could be successful with a pandemic. And so making him step down now, I actually feel is a little unfair. There were lots of problems, again, the rollout, but the irony that is not lost on me is the minister in charge of the coronavirus, so basically the guy who's in charge of the vaccine and the rollout and stuff, he's running for prime minister. So the prime minister is stepping down because of coronavirus, and the guy who is supposed to be in charge of coronavirus is stepping up. So there are 4 people. There's 2 people who just threw their hats into the ring, as the saying goes, quite recently. We should meet our new potential prime ministers. And what do we think of them? What do we know? Well, honestly, not much. Japanese politics is it's not like American politics. You're not going to get like hours and hours of stories out of it. The scandals, for the most part, are actually pretty tame. Like, I bet they've all done dirty stuff and stuff, but that's not going to come out. So we have Fumio Kishida, who's actually currently the foreign minister. And interestingly, one of the things that they want to do is introduce mini nuclear reactors so they can hit zero carbon emissions in the future. So these are called SMRSs or SMRs. They're small modular reactors. So they're saying we want to get rid of big nuclear reactors, or maybe just keep them and hopefully update them. And then in cities, we'll have mini nuclear reactors, modular design, so that we can, sort of plunk them down in cities where they're needed the most. And that will get us to zero carbon emissions, which a lot of people are anti-nuclear energy. And I'm not anti-nuclear energy. And you can say, well, like Fukushima happened in Japan. That's fair, is correct. A lot of people fail to take in the details, which is why I end up doing podcasts. The nuclear reactor in Fukushima, I believe, was built in the 70s or 80s. And it had not been updated in any real way. And this is one of the things they were talking about. Like, we need to update this nuclear reactor. We need to make it safe for modern times. We get it up to modern standards. And the local government was like, nah, it's still running. It's fine. And then there was the earthquake, and it survived. And then there was the tsunami. And yes, it had to be shut down, but it didn't blow up. So my feeling is, if they had actually done the appropriate thing, and so this is where the mistake was actually made. It wasn't actually like using nuclear power in a power plant. The mistake was not keeping it upgraded. I have a lot of faith in modern engineers. And I think if you give modern engineers the job of updating and making nuclear power plants safe, I think they could. And the problem of solving what to do with nuclear waste, I actually think they could if they had the funds. And this is why it was never updated, is because they're like, well, that costs money and we don't want to spend money. So that's, to me, the short-sightedness of politics versus the reality of something like nuclear power is, well, if we don't have to spend money because it's working, then we shouldn't. And then something bad happens. I think a nuclear reactor of the same age in a different country just would have blown up. So I actually think the engineers in the 70s or 80s did a really good job because it lasted that long. It was time for an upgrade. So if they start now with SMRs, I actually think it's not a terrible idea because it will be safer. I think the scary part is that they might be in cities or close to cities. But if it's done with modern safety standards and modern engineering, I think you're actually in pretty good shape. So I don't understand enough about it to say yes. But I am not against the idea like some people would, because some people hear the word nuclear and they just lose their minds and they don't think about anything anymore. Sanae Takaichi is the current communications minister. Now, the interesting thing is these are both ladies. And the ladies could then potentially be the next and first female prime minister in Japan, which I would really like to see. One of them is super hardcore right, like conservative. And I'm not a fan of that because just my personal politics, of course. So I don't want but the problem, I guess, is that the first female prime minister probably is going to be on the conservative side. But I just like the idea of all these men who, half the scandals we've talked about in the past have been Japanese politicians making sexist comments. So the leader being a woman, I think would be really nice. I think, again, this would get more women into politics and would actually change sort of the underlying atmosphere of the old man's club, the boys' club that you have right now in Japanese politics. I think that has to go. I mean, I've actually said on record, to really improve Japan, these old Japanese men need to die. Which is a very harsh statement, but that's the only way you're going to get rid of them. They like stay in politics for years and years and years and years. So the current front runner is Kono, which we talked about last week. He's a reformist, and a lot of new lawmakers like him. He's basically, he appeals to the youth. The youth would be probably like 40-year-olds. But in politics, again, these are people who actually have power now. So they're like the late 30s, 40s, starting out their political career, and they support him. And renewal is kind of a word that appeals to me. Again, I think Japan needs sort of innovation. It needs to grow. And then you have the opposite. You have Kishida, who is an old lawmakers like him. So he has 47 members in his pocket, is the way it was phrased. So he's basically got a team, and that team, they're just going to vote for him regardless because they're like friends. It's almost a popularity contest. So those are the four basic people in charge. Seiko Noda, the former women's minister in charge of women's... Sorry, that sentence was wrong. The former minister in charge of women's empowerment. Fumio Kishida, the foreign minister. Sanai Takaichi, the communications minister. And Taro Kono, who is the reformist, who he is the front runner, and I think he's the front runner for a reason, because I think he actually has a really good shot. But the leader of the minister in charge of women's empowerment is the one I would actually be most interested in. She's clearly the most interesting person in this race. They all have to now compare themselves to the current Prime Minister, Suga, and they all have said they would have done better with the coronavirus than him, which I think is pretty shitty. I don't think... The only thing, again, as an outsider, there are two things. We needed a stronger shutdown that was real, and we needed the rollout of the actual vaccines to be faster. Despite how late the vaccine has come to Japan and actually been rolled out, it's now surpassed percentage-wise how much they've done in America. But I don't think that's a fair comparison either, because we're talking about the size of population is much smaller. So it's not really... Yeah, I mean, they make that comparison statistically. It seems good. It's one of those things that you can make it look good, but I don't think it's actually that good. So they all said they would have done better with coronavirus. But Kono, again, is the current minister in charge of coronavirus. So could he have done better? Because he's actually the guy in charge. No one seems to actually be like, we all could have done better. You were supposed to be doing it. How is this possible that you could have done better than the current prime minister? And they all say they want to reduce the income gap in Japan. There's a lot of old money. There's a lot of families in like control of a lot of stuff. So there is like the middle class is sort of lower middle class compared to other countries. And a strong economy actually needs a really strong middle class. I read a thing about this. This is the excitement of reading about economics. The problem if you have a large income gap, if you hit a recession or depression, you like that tipping point. Rich people have sort of funds, liquid assets, and they can survive a depression, whereas people who are below or middle class with a large income gap, they can't, which means all that money stays frozen where it is. So it actually means your economy is less resilient. So it's actually even better for rich people to have a stronger middle class, which weirdly I bet they don't want. There were some other things that come up. There's two topics that come up. It was really interesting. Do you agree with same-sex marriage? And do you agree that couples need to have the same surnames? Because this has actually been a thing. Should married couples, be allowed to have different surnames? That's a big issue in Japan. Kono goes, yeah, same-sex marriages, on board. I think that's all right. Kono says same-sex marriage is okay. Kishida said, same-sex marriages, not so much. Surnames, I think we should do public opinion. And Takaichi, no. So Takaichi probably is my least favorite because it's the most conservative one who doesn't want any changes at all, which sucks. Relating to a comment I made, They did a survey. Now, a survey, again, they say a majority of people, but a majority of people that were surveyed is actually what you need to say. A majority of the people surveyed think that Japan needs a proper lockdown law. So the biggest problem with Japan right now is that the lockdown doesn't really mean anything. And the reason the lockdown doesn't mean anything is because it's written into the constitution that you cannot inhibit people's movement. So saying you have to stay home isn't constitutional in Japan. Saying that you can't go out and get drinks is not constitutional in Japan. Even saying that restaurants and stuff have to close at 8 o'clock is risky if you're talking from a legal standpoint as far as the Constitution is concerned. But 56.5% said, yes, we need a real law for lockdown, and 26% said no. And I think that is just a case of, yes, the reason so one of the scientists recently was like, or doctors, was like, we seem to have finished the 5th wave, but if we're not careful, we're going to have a 6th wave, which is ridiculous. Yeah, it's just silly. It's silly that you would have that many waves since we know what works and what doesn't work. So this is, again, dealing with the race for prime minister and opposition parties. So opposition parties, I talked about them previously, and they're like, oh, you suck, so you shouldn't step down. It was kind of the weird logic they were putting out there. Opposition parties have complained about heavy media coverage of the ruling LDP in the lead up to its September leadership election. So they're saying, you guys, the media, are covering this too much. You guys aren't paying attention to us enough. But of course, the problem, first of all, is that this is probably the most exciting thing happening in politics. So, of course, that's what the media is going to focus on. You have 2 women running for prime minister. Running's a weird thing because they're actually just trying to get in charge of their party, and then de facto, by being in charge of their party, they become prime minister. It's not like people are actually voting for them. That's interesting. Parties are asking for political neutrality in news reporting ahead of this autumn's election in the House of Representatives. So they're saying like, oh, don't give them coverage because you're not giving us coverage. It's weird. It's weird that they complain about so many stuff. So they're basically saying now they're doing the LDP presidential election. So you become president of the party and then prime minister of the country. Only 1 million people can vote in that because it's representatives. And I have to actually go and study. I have to watch one of those cartoons which explains to you how the government works. The real battle is the lower house election with 100 million voters. We present to you a clear alternative. So they're saying, don't focus on the prime minister race, focus on this other one that no one cares about, but it is kind of, in their opinion, more important. But I think it's because they're involved in those lower votes. The opposition has been stepping up its attacks on Suga over his handling of the virus to gain momentum ahead of the lower house poll. So they're saying, like, this is where we're going to get our votes. Don't pay attention to that other stuff. Pay attention to us. But I think this is jealousy. The Democratic Party, though, their response is not good to say something that puts pressure on news organizations. So they're just like, shut up. That's the short version of that story. Yeah, I mean, look, what am I doing right now? I'm not a news organization, but I mean, the prime minister race is important and it's more interesting. It's more exciting than the lower house races full of people I don't know, have never heard of, have obscure policies. I think it's because there's a clear sort of goal with the upper house race. And it's because the clear goal is the prime minister of the country, which weirdly is significant. Kyoto is a tourist city. So Kyoto was pretty hard hit by the pandemic because tourism's been down. A lot of people don't realize that Kyoto, the city, is now facing bankruptcy. There were 3.8 million tourists in 2019, and there were 450,000 in 2020. So, and hotel reservations went down 60%. This led to cuts in the city budget. So 550 civil employees were fired. They are currently have $860 billion in debt. 860 billion yen in debt, and it's going to increase by 280 by 2025. So they're saying when it hits that mark, they're just run out of money. The whole city is bankrupt. The subway is 5.4 million yen in debt already. And so that is going to lead to, right now, if you're over 70, you get a discount on the train, and they're actually going to take that away. That's what they're talking about. They're also talking about subsidizing daycare, which seems weird because if you don't have enough money, why are you subsidizing something that costs the government money? But that hopefully will attract families to Kyoto, which means they will live there and grow up there. One of the biggest problems is the population in Kyoto, compared to Japan as a whole, is really old. We're actually going to get to Japanese population and age really soon. So they want to attract families, have families come and settle in Kyoto, and they'll grow up there and pay their taxes for their whole life. That'll actually be good for the country. And then the current population they have that are getting discounts and stuff, they're going to die off. And that, again, leaves them with no income source. So they need young people to show up and start living in Kyoto. This is a very common problem. So if you've watched news from a lot of Western countries, that the churches don't pay taxes. In Japan, temples and shrines also do not pay taxes. Back in 2019, actually this happened way back in the 80s, but it's been ongoing, is the city's like, you guys are pulling in tons of cash. You got to pay taxes. And they're like, now the city's about to go bankrupt. We really, really need you to pay some taxes. And the temples and shrines said no. Back in the 80s, when they did this, the shrines shut their doors to the public. So they're just like, no one can come in. The whole point of people going to Kyoto, if you ever have gone or plan on going, is to see temples and shrines. Like, you will literally just walk from shrine to shrine to shrine. I went with my wife. It was horrible. It was just hours and hours of walking. And then after the third temple, they all kind of look the same. And after the third or fourth shrine, there is no significant difference. And I was like, can we do something else? She's like, well, but this is a really famous temple. This is how Japanese people think. It's really famous. I'm like, they're all fucking famous. Come on. But they don't pay taxes. So they're saying, like, this is a huge problem. You would be a good source of income. And the churches, like, the temples and shrines are like, yeah, but we want that money. Because, that's what Buddha would want, is for us to have the city go bankrupt and we hold on to our funds. This is always one of the ironies of religion, because religions profess to be generous, but then do everything in their power to hold on to all the money they make. The thing is, this was coming, but coronavirus made it obvious it was going to happen. So there was no sort of decision or argument or choice. It just made it really clear that it's going to happen sooner than they were expecting, and coronavirus has really sort of pushed that into the forefront. So Kyoto, the city, if it goes bankrupt, actually is a question of what happens. Do they just shut down the city and kick everyone out? No. The federal government would actually take over running the city. And so they would subsidize it for X amount of years. Everyone in there, though, in the civil service, probably everyone important, would lose their job. So maybe that's why they care so much. I didn't actually think about that until just now. But Kyoto, is in a lot of trouble. So should we not go into a sixth wave and Japan settles down completely and you want to visit Japan, I'd go spend some money in Kyoto, but not at the shrines because they're dicks. So I said I would talk about the population of Japan. Recently, the older population in Japan hit 29.1% is over 65. And then it just had some numbers. So men are 20%, 26% of... this is the problem statistics. I should write those sentences out properly. Of men, like total males in Japan, 26% are over 65. For females, over 32% are over 65. Over 100s, there are 86,500 people over 100 in Japan, and 88% of those are women. So that actually takes us to something I said earlier. I said, like, these old men have to get out of politics. And then I said, I want a female prime minister. But we could end up with a female prime minister who never dies. Which would be terrifying. There are twins. They are 107 years old. So they actually got really specific because they have to be for the Guinness Book of World Records. 107 years and 330 days. The sisters, Umeno Sumiyama and Kume Kodama. Wait a minute. Identical twins. Oh, they're... I'm so dumb. I'm so dumb. I'm like, they have different last names. They have different family names. But of course, they've probably been married. I feel really stupid having paused to think about that. At least I thought about it and realized what I was doing. That shows you I'm not an idiot because I realized my own mistake. Okay, so they're identical twins. They've been alive for 107 years and 330 days. September 1st, they broke the previous record of 107 years and 175 days, set by Japanese twin sisters Kin Narita and Jin Kanie. It's weird. We know exactly when those two twins died. And then it gets into the population stuff I just said. 29% of the population is over 65. And it has a lot of people who are 100 years old. Cup noodle has turned 50, which isn't, I don't eat a lot of instant noodles, but I know people who do. And at university, I had some. I think that was a pretty normal thing. September 18th, 1971, the cup noodle was launched. So that little styrofoam cup, you pour water and wait 3 minutes and you have your noodles. Production increased 1,000% over the years. And lately, the brand has become more health conscious. So they're doing high protein, low carb options. They're doing vegan options. They're trying to switch the plastic to paper. And they're still making changes to make cup noodle better so you can feel happier about using it on into the future. That's all there is to say. Cup noodle turned 50 and yippee-ki-yay for them. A 30-year-old man stood outside an elementary school swinging a knife around. Now, he didn't actually hurt anybody, but you know what's a bad idea is getting people's attention by swinging knives around. That is in violation of the sword and firearms law. Now, I've actually talked about this before. In Japan, it's actually illegal to carry a knife unless you have a purpose for carrying it. So if you go and say like, I'm going fishing, I have a fish gutting knife, you can carry that knife. If you are not going fishing and you have a fish gutting knife, it's actually illegal to have that knife on your person. He admitted to the charges. And the reason he was swinging a knife around an elementary school was he was angry at the kids at the school and wanted to scare them. They do not say, again, the most important bit is what did those kids do to piss off this guy so much that he woke up one morning and said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get a knife and I'm going to walk over to that school. I'm going to stand outside the school and I'm just going to show him my knife. I don't get what he was thinking. Like since he didn't plan on killing the kids, which is good, like don't, but what was the point of scaring the kids? So I'm wondering, like, what did little kids do? They shout at you, they make noise. Those are the two things. So either they just make a lot of noise, which kids do, which isn't their fault. And if you're an adult, you just kind of get past it. Or they said something to him that bothered him so much that he felt he had to go threaten them. But threatening people in Japan, that's not okay. It's actually illegal. And he's probably going to get in a lot of trouble. He's probably going to go to jail for a little bit. A woman went on a Pappa Katsu. Pappa Katsu is usually an older man pays money to a younger woman. In this case, the woman's 19 and the guy's 37 to just hang out with him and go on a date. So it doesn't, I guess there's implied sexual intercourse. It's not explicit. So you don't actually, the girl doesn't have to. She's not a paid sex worker. But I think it's implied if you're going out for dinner and stuff that you're going to get some after. Yes, they went and had dinner and then they went to a love hotel. Guy's a company executive. He has money. So that part wasn't a big deal. While he was showering, she took his watch and left the love hotel. The watch was worth 13 million yen. They did not say the brand. I really wanted to look up the watch that he was probably wearing. A standard Rolex, so like the low end of the Rolex is probably 1 million yen. So this is going to be a high-end watch, regardless of what kind it is. She went to a pawn shop to try to sell it. Guy had obviously already reported his watch stolen. She was arrested with another guy. 10 men that we know of have been ripped off by the same woman. They meet on a dating app. They go to a hotel. They, do some stuff. The guy takes a shower. She takes his watch and leaves. All total, the watches were 35 million yen. So this last one makes up nearly half. It's not quite. It's like 40% of the total value of the watches. So the other guys were wearing expensive watches. Like I said, a Rolex that's 1 million or 2 million yen. But this 13 million yen would have been the big payday if the problem with stealing and trying to sell an item that's expensive, it's really obvious to the people buying it, like the pawn shop, and they're going to ask where you got it from. And if the guy reports it to the police, you're going to get caught right away. I'm not going to give you any advice. My actual advice is if you're a 19-year-old girl, don't do Pappa Katsu. I had a girl, a student, and she said she wanted a rich boyfriend. And we had this conversation, and I decided to try to be helpful. I'm not rich, so she wasn't interested in me. She just wanted money. I said, well, if that's your actual goal, what are you doing to find a rich boyfriend? She's like, well, I don't know. I don't know what to do. How do I get one? I was like, well, go to an expensive bar, dress up like you were supposed to meet someone there and just wait and look sad and lonely, have one drink and just nurse it for a long time. And then when you see a guy who's in that bar, if it's an expensive bar, that guy's probably well off. Check out his clothes and his watch and stuff. Shoes are very important. You should check out his shoes. Just, look at him and then look sad, but sort of smile and then look at your drink. And then he'll come over. And 2 weeks later, she had an incredibly rich boyfriend. He was a pilot and he was basically flying her around to different places. And I never saw her again after the second or third time she came and spoke to me, because I'm assuming she actually just got married. But she got what she wanted, and I'm assuming the guy got what he wanted because they stayed together. And you might say that's not romantic and more of a financial transaction, but if that's what you both want, that's not a terrible thing. And what a horrible message to end the podcast on. But weirdly, that's what I'm doing.
Thank you for listening. You can subscribe on iTunes, Google, Spotify, or anywhere you get podcasts. You can also watch on YouTube/VelociPodcast or streaming on twitch.tv/ChunkMakeBeefChest. You can find Ninja News Japan on Facebook. Send questions or comments to speakpipe.com/VelociPodcast. Link in the description. Check out all the podcasts in the VelociPodcast family. See McB, Ninja News Japan, and Daily Affirmations Weekly. Ninja News Japan does not endorse compensated dating, but if all you want is money and you are both happy with the arrangement, we aren't going to judge you either. Ninja News Japan just wants everyone to be happy.